The other day, I saw a video clip from a comedian who said, one of the reasons that we have such a social media kind of nightmare around us right now is that there aren't enough people with group text threads where they can say whatever it is that they want to say. And so they go and choose to say everything to complete strangers. I think we all know kind of what that's like when you have a guest in the house and then that guest leaves and it's just the people who really can say anything to each other, and nobody's going to misunderstand, nobody's going to judge. I think we all kind of know what that's like. Well, every week here I have a guest with us. Sometimes it's somebody that I know but you don't. Sometimes it's somebody that I'm getting to know and maybe have just met for the first time. So every once in a while, what we like to do here is to just have us with a kind of a moment where we can say anything, talk about anything, and that is when I call Beth. So we have with us today our friend Beth Moore, and we are going to be talking about Ecclesiastes. And the reason that we're talking about Ecclesiastes is because we were talking by text message, and I said, she said that she's teaching through Ecclesiastes, and I mentioned that was that I preached from Ecclesiastes in my first sermon, Ecclesiastes chapter 12. To which you said
I
what,
said,
Beth?
well, you have to tell them how old you were when you preached it, because this is a very important part of it. Tell them.
I
12.
was 12.
12 years old.
Yeah,
What
12.
I ask you, 12-year-old on earth, teaches, number one, is standing in a pulpit. Number two, is preaching his first sermon out of Ecclesiastes. I said, that is the most Enneagram 4 thing I have ever heard in my entire life. It honestly amused me all day long. But then I told him back, I said, here's what you need to know. That my first messages, now this wouldn't have started until I was like 18 years old, but after that point, every message I ever gave, I entitled it by the same exact title, no matter what it was on, no matter where it was found, it was called the same thing, Celebrate Jesus. And listen, the title always had an exclamation mark after it. So we said, oh my gosh, Tigger and Eeyore have to talk about Ecclesiastes. We just have to.
Now, in my defense,
I want to hear this.
I was preaching from the first part of Ecclesiastes 12. Remember
Yes.
your Creator in the days when you are
Yes.
young. And it was youth
Yes.
night, so there was that. But you are right. At 12 years old, I was saying vanity is vanity, all is vanity, and you were doing a conga line around the sanctuary. So that's the difference.
Absolutely was, but it just delighted me to no end that that's sort of how it launched. And some things, there are a lot of things that God fills out in us, and He's always doing what the Apostle Paul called to the Thessalonians, completing what is lacking in our faith. But I love the thought that somewhere in the core of us, that personality is drawn to those same things. But I have to tell you, so the reason, because our listeners need to know why we were ever talking about in the first place. I reached out to you because about a month prior to Simulcast, which was just this last weekend, the Lord had begun to impress on me that I would be teaching out of Ecclesiastes. And so I reached out to you to ask you if you had any favorite writers on it. And that's what sort of started the conversation. And I have to tell you, Russ, I have nearly, now we've texted about other things, but I have nearly texted you 24 times in the last month. When I tell you that Tigger fell in love with Ecclesiastes, you have to roll with it. You can't just, you got to just take the ride. If you don't get on it and just ride with it and let it go and take all of its twists and its turns, and it's going to seem to, circle back around. We're back there again because there's lots and lots of repetition. And then other times where you're going to sink down and when he's coming up, you don't even realize he's come up until he says that you need to have joy in the God of your youth, and you're just like not even ready. But I fell in love with it. I was so glad we had this coming, because my thought when I finished up on Saturday was, I'm so sad to be done with it. But I thought, okay, we've got another conversation going.
When I was telling somebody about this and about our text conversation, I said, but it is Ecclesiastes 12. It's have
That's
joy
right.
in your Creator in your youth. And this person said, yeah, because you're
Yes.
going to die,
Yes.
which is the
Yes.
rest of that. I'm like, okay, fair
But what
enough, fair
is
enough.
so
Now, but
great is that, he is so burdened by the fact that he's lived this fantastic life and he's going to die like a common person, which just kills me. I mean, there's such a
yeah.
lesson in it, because he's like, after all of this, the wisest of all the wise people, and I'm going to die like a plain person. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Well, that's a good place to say, because I think we have got a lot of listeners who are
Mm-hmm.
not Christians. We've got a lot of listeners who are new Christians. We've got a lot of Christians who are kind of on their way to
Yes.
becoming Christians, and I think there might be some people who will say, "Well, I mean, I've not been a Bible nerd since age 4, like these two have. So I won't understand what Ecclesiastes really is, and how it matters to me." I think that what we're talking about today is
Me too.
immediately relevant to
Me too.
anybody who
Mm-hmm.
is listening. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that
I
is?
think I thought continually while I was studying it, but I thought it many, many times because of books like Job and parts of Jeremiah, and so many of the Psalms as lament. I feel like some people are resistant to getting in the scriptures because they have no idea how God just made sure that every conceivable mindset is represented there. He even, I love this, and I don't know how on topic or off topic this is, but this is where I hope so much that somebody is listening in that really has never studied. When you have a God that is so completely God, so completely comfortable with who he is, and what the sacred page held, that he says, now I'm going to tell you something. I'm, of course, paraphrasing, but he says, my thoughts are a whole lot higher than yours. And so there are going to be lots of times you're going to want to complain about me. And you're going to want to complain about life that I created and the way it was created. And so here you go. I'm actually going to supply you with verbiage so that you can go all the way down with it. And I mean, you can get it to come out of your mouth, out of the hidden places where there are things that we think, well, you could never say that to God, really? Because I would really
Mm-hmm.
challenge you to get in there and see if some of these things don't make you think, I can't believe that Jeremiah got to live through saying, I feel like you've been dishonest with me. It's a
Yeah,
marvelous thing. And so
yeah.
Ecclesiastes is all the things. One of my favorite portions of it, I've got it in front of me because I just, this part, I need somebody to hear this that has no background in the scriptures. He comes to a point in 2:17 where he goes, therefore I hated life. I hate life. And
Yeah.
then he says right after that, and I hated all my work. And, I told the group this weekend, I said, wouldn't it be something if you just had the reference on your desk, Ecclesiastes 2:18, and it didn't have the verse with it. Somebody thought, they're really godly, and went and looked that up, and it just said, I hate my work. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. You felt that. I felt that. Maybe somebody's young enough to have never had the thought, I hate life. But I think that we have
Yeah.
felt that, many of us, even in the last couple of weeks, with so much violence and so much
Mm-hmm.
hatred. And it's like, and I've got a dear friend that has aggressive cancer. And, it's just like, God, help us out here. It's rough down here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting to me about Ecclesiastes is, now, first of all, before I say this, tell our people who are new to the Bible, if you had to describe who and what Ecclesiastes is? How would you describe it
Well,
to them?
I would think that it becomes pretty clear, since he is speaking to the young and he's talking about the life that he lived, that this is someone in his aging years that really feels like the only thing left for him, particularly since he's done it all. And he describes it. He's literally, he almost says that he just tested the whole thing. I said to myself, 2-1, go ahead. I'll test you with every pleasure. Enjoy everything. I mean, he withheld nothing from himself. So this is a man that has lived all of these things, built all these things, had all these successes, and that primarily, I think the thing he thinks that is in front of him is that his life is about to be over. And so he's called the teacher. He is never called by an actual name. He's introduced as the teacher, as a Kohelet in Hebrew, and he just takes us on the ride of all the questions you could possibly ask about how futile life seems. I think that is that word that is translated futility or futile. It is used, I wrote it down somewhere. It's used some 39 times, 39 times, where he's just going, it just all feels futile, and it's got a wide semantic
Hmm.
range, meaningless, but most literally vapor, like air, like breath. One of the theologians that I studied said a good metaphor for it is smoke. In other words, it's there all right. He's not saying it
Yeah.
doesn't exist. He's not saying it doesn't mean anything. What he's saying is you can't grasp it if your life depends on it. And the
Hmm.
more you try to control it, the more miserable you are.
Well, that's what I think is interesting about Ecclesiastes, because I think if somebody heard, the beginning of this conversation, they say, okay, this is somebody who says, I hate life, they might assume that it's kind of like Job, that is
Mm-hmm.
somebody who has lived through all of these
Mm-hmm.
really, really
Isn't it
difficult and hard
interesting?
times and says country
Mm-hmm.
song type thing. But
The
it's
opposite.
not. It's somebody for whom things have gone right, but who is saying, what is this? I was sometimes in the Sunday school class I teach, I go around and I have people introduce themselves, and I'll ask them a question. And one of them was, I think it was this past week, I said, if you could do anything for an afternoon just to sort of unwind, what would it be? And one man, doctor in the class, said that he was tempted, knowing that I'm a fan of The Office, to quote Creed Bratton, saying, "Well, if I can't scuba, then what's this all been about?
What's the use of life?
What's the use of life?" And that's kind
Yes.
of the
Yes.
Ecclesiastes is kind of Creed Bratton in that moment of, well, what's the point of this? Well, let's talk first about, what do you think about, I think sometimes people, when they know a little more Ecclesiastes than they think
Yes.
they do, if for no other reason than they will have heard in some
Yes.
old movie
Song,
soundtrack or
something.
something,
Mm-hmm.
the Birds, yeah, Time to
Yes.
Be Born,
Yes.
Time to Die, so forth. What do you think about the way that this book is talking to us about
Mm-hmm.
times and
Oh, I want to
seasons?
talk to that. And see, I had no idea. This is one of the fun things about us just getting on here and talking back and forth about scripture, is I had no idea what you were going to interject and inquire about in regard to it. But this is what drew me to it in the first place. So I'm going to put this in a real a short story. Over the last year, I have had two very major surgeries. I have skeletal problems and needed to have just some mechanics put in place of some of the bone, all sorts of things that I had to have done, and have spent a lot of time in physical therapy, a lot of times working my tail to the bone on just trying to get restored. And I am well into that and can do things now that I couldn't do 14 months ago and couldn't do 7 years ago. But all of this year, I have had on my mind that there is a little field that is not far from our home where after I wrote Chasing Vines, which was tracing the whole metaphor of vines all the way from Genesis to Revelation. This is the kind of stuff I love. And of course, the heart of it being Jesus saying, I'm the vine, you are the branches. It is to your Father's glory that you bear much fruit. I planted a tiny little vineyard. It was just about 20 vines, hand planted them, built everything around them, tended to them like it was the finest vineyard in all of Tuscany. I can't tell you how I tended to that thing, but all year long, that thing was just weighing on me and weighing on me because it was physically impossible for me to deal with it. And so Keith kept asking me,
Mm,
Russ, over and over again, have you been to the field? Have you been to the field? No, because I mean, I was there constantly, several times a day. I'm
mm,
checking on it, messing with it, seeing if any part of the wire fence was down, anything. I finally, a month ago, went to the vine field and everything I feared had come to pass.
mm,
Because the wires that protected it had all been torn down by deer, by all sorts of critters. About a third of the vines were dead. The weeds were almost waist high, ant hills everywhere. It was destroyed. It was absolutely destroyed. Russ, I went home from there dashed. I can't even explain to you.
mhm,
I felt like the biggest failure. Like I had worked so hard on it, and it was all this kind of stuff of what made you think you could do that anyway. You fool. All these things that we think, and here it was that I had never worked harder in my life than I've worked in the last year. But we deal constantly with finitude. We are limited creatures, and to just get to the
mhm,
basic point here, it wasn't the season. It just wasn't. I had worked. It's not like I had kicked back and set my feet up and neglected it. And so the question was, and I felt like it was one of those near existential questions: what happens when that which you neglected, that which was important to you, it might be relationships, friendships, gets neglected because you had to tend to something else? That it wasn't, there was a time to
mhm,
plant, there's a time to uproot. And that's what led me there to begin with, is this struggle with time, that we don't have time to do everything that we would like to do, or can I be so bold to say almost even need to do? I mean, isn't there always something I really need to
yeah,
get to that? I need to get to that house repair. I need to get, we're struggling constantly. And I think that it's speaking so much to that limitation, that there isn't a time,
mhm.
we don't have time for everything, but the Lord in his timelessness knows what season it is. He knows what time it is. It was important to me.
You know, I think it's striking too how one of the things that Ecclesiastes shows is it's all going to end up that way, even if you do tend
Yes.
to it.
Yes.
Eventually, you've got a limit to it, and I think sometimes what people think is they'll see something, they have something they really poured themselves into, and then that season or that time ends, and they think, well, it's all over, so what was the point? Why did I do that? And I know I do that a lot of times too. But I mean, ultimately, as he says, there is no remembrance of things
That's right.
past. Things you even the stuff you
Yes.
work so hard on. Ultimately, there comes some point where
That's
people
exactly
don't
right.
even
And
remember
and
that
he's worried
it's
about
there.
that. And I don't you think that part of, and I'm talking of course about, first world mindsets, but that our terror that we just might be forgotten, that we'll do
Hmm.
things, whether it's saying outrageous things online or doing outrageous things in public, just to be remembered, even if it's for something terrible. And I think
Yeah.
that one of the best things that we can possibly hold on to in our hearts is the thought that it will all be forgotten except the glory of God. And I'm thinking about where
Hmm.
where it says in Hebrews chapter 6, God will remember. I love that, okay, we can't live so people will remember us. We put up all these
Yeah.
institutions in remembrance of somebody or in remembrance of
Yeah.
some system. And it's like, why are we doing that? But, but you think, well, then it was useless. No, no. He says, the Lord will remember your sacrifices. He'll remember what you did for the service of the saints. He won't forget
Yeah.
it, but let everybody else forget it. Now, one of the interesting things about it, I'd be so curious to hear what you think about this. In the wisdom tradition, of course, there's Job, which we can find I love that you made that difference. I wish I had pointed it out this weekend that Job had lost it all. This one has had it all and still felt like he had come to the same basic conclusion. But then there's Proverbs. And so that juxtaposition
Yeah.
is so compelling. And I think one, I just want to think in pencil here. I think one of the take homes of Ecclesiastes is you can be one of the wisest people on planet Earth. You can have lived by the codes of wisdom. You can have done all of these things, and you're still not going to have it all figured out. I mean, it's going to be the better life, better to have lived wisely than foolishly, but you're still
Hmm.
going to realize how little control you had. And you're still going to realize that you can't have enough wisdom to figure it all out. You just can't. And something about that is freeing. The psalmist said, I will not concern myself with things that are too wonderful for me. And it's just like too
Yeah.
high. It doesn't mean we don't give them any thought. It means that at some point we have to rest it and go, I do not have the mind of God here.
Yeah. I think about Tim Keller said one time, I think he was quoting Trimper Longman, who's written
Mm-hmm.
on Ecclesiastes and on Proverbs, and said, if all that we had was Proverbs, we would be tempted to have a
Oh, yeah,
prosperity gospel.
absolutely.
That the better I do, the more God's going to bless me. And if all that we had was Ecclesiastes, we'd be tempted to just sort of be
Yes,
nihilists. What difference
yes,
does it make?
yes,
But when you have both of
that's
them
right.
together, it's
But
it's
don't
saying
you
something.
think that the teacher in Ecclesiastes, he was counting on the prosperity gospel? I think to me
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
clear that he really, I mean, that's what he had set his mind on. This is the way it was going to be. And then it did not turn out that way. And we get to see what happens. And so one reason why I'm so thankful it's there, I found myself saying to the Lord over and over again, I'm so grateful that you put this, that you made sure, because we might know from a little bit of the history of inspiration and transmission that there were two schools of thought that fought over whether or not Ecclesiastes belonged in the canon. And to me, I'm so thankful that God had it where, yes, he knew what he had inspired. He knew what he meant to be on the sacred page, that we would know that these things were within the normal realm of life experience to grapple with. One of the things that I was thinking about was a friend of mine that had been part of the Christian tradition where they were taught that you don't affirm any kind of sickness, like
Hmm.
that being able to say, oh no, I am not sick. It doesn't matter what that particular diagnosis was. I do not have that. I refuse to have that. And so she said, if you were sick, you couldn't go to church that Sunday. You understand what I'm saying? Because you were going to go
Hmm.
show that you had
Yeah.
a bad cough and didn't have enough faith. And which to us, especially because of where we come from now, our traditions have their own problems. None of them have
Right. Right.
it together perfectly. But to think about that seems so insane to us. And to see that there is a very biblical place for doubt, for just going like, I don't see where any of it meant anything. And one of the things I am positive that we're going to be able to count on when we see Jesus and we come into the renewal of all things is that it is that I love to think of it as, that if our life is, say, for instance, in the metaphor of a poem, that we've got lines missing, but we have pieces
Yeah.
that have a few phrases here and a few phrases there, but all sorts of lines missing. But it will all be there. And to him,
Yeah.
it makes sense. And to us, it will make sense.
Sometimes I think when I'm reading Ecclesiastes that it sounds almost like the people, we would have these people. I remember when we first got married, there would be these people that would say, "Oh, just wait till that first year of marriage.
Yes,
It's
yes,
terrible." And, when it wasn't, we're like, but then those same people are saying, well, yeah, you're on your
yeah,
honeymoon now. Just
yes,
wait till you're
yes,
5 years in. And then when you start having kids, well, just wait until they're
yes.
teenagers. And at some point you're like, I don't know that I need you
Gosh,
saying that
no.
to me right now. And sometimes, I find myself now in that place where you want to say to somebody who's just really brimming with idealism, be ready that that's going to be tempered a little bit. But then I think, I don't really know that I want them to know that
Right,
yet.
right, right.
you know, and how do
Mm-hmm.
you know when you're being that person? And I find myself doing the exact opposite. With one of my sons is so diligent, so hard charging, he's more responsible than I am by far. And I often want to say to him, "Hey, you're 20,
Have a little fun.
relax, have some fun, enjoy things, But then I think, that kind of, I'm sure there were people saying that to me
Mm-hmm.
at that time when I'm, preaching
Yes,
Ecclesiastes.
yes.
I'm sure there are people saying that to me, and I'm sure my response was, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, what's the
Mm-hmm.
balance there
Mm-hmm.
for you when it comes to trying to figure out how much do you kind of want to say, be ready for this, and how much do you want to just let
For
people
me
find
now,
out?
this is going to be so typical. So please, this is when you need to put on your dark glasses and not roll your eyes. Uh, I think that life gets richer. So I can honestly say to someone, let me tell you that, for instance, if someone is in ministry, if I know that they have really had a time of surrendering to what God has called them to do. They've got a whole life of ministry ahead of them. Sometimes I might say to them, listen, ministry is going to be harder than you ever dreamed, and God is going to be better than you ever imagined. And I can honestly say to someone, this they can take to me, they can take to the bank, and that is, God is going to be so faithful to you. He will be so faithful to you,
Hmm.
and all the ups and downs. I can say that. And I think, Russ, that let me let me find a way to say this right. If we're walking with him, and I mean, just like, I don't mean perfectly. I don't even mean really beautifully. I mean, it's just wobbly, isn't it? And I
Hmm.
mean, there's you
Yeah.
tripping up and tumbling, and him helping you back up again, and doing the thing. But if we stay in there with it, and we live a life of some semblance of faith, and seek him through prayer, have some life in the scripture, I'm going to tell you that I do think there is a transitioning, that there is more gladness and appreciation for the small things. And I think I don't want
Yeah.
us to get anywhere near the conclusion of this podcast without us going here, because it's one of the things that the teacher says over and over. And I marked it. One of the things I did, I went into my Bible. You can see where some of the highlighting is. I highlight, I guess that's the way, highlighted different phrases I color coded them. and the times that he says, find
Mm.
gladness in this or find joy in this, the best thing you can do is find joy in what you're eating, you're drinking, and in the wife of your youth, whatever it may be. I do think that, and this may not have everything to do with faith. Someone else that is my same age may say, I came to the same thing, a deeper appreciation of life in more advanced age. And it wasn't necessarily because of faith, but I will always put those two things together. I do think that I notice things and I stop and I see things. Russ, do you remember? I cannot remember for the life of me who you were interviewing, but please don't let it be me, because I'd hate to think that I forgot that it was with me that you said it. But you said, do you remember? Because I captured this. This is not even going to sound big to somebody, but that's the point of it. You said that there was a time you were sitting at your dining table, which you would have done a jillion times with your people, and that you
Yeah.
stopped. I could almost get a lump in my throat about it because I so identified with it. And you just looked around, you just cased those people. And there's Maria,
Hmm.
and there's the boys, and they're all in the throes of conversation. And it's like these marvelous creatures. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, I do. I do. And it's one of those, it's what there have been a few times when that's happened and where you just sort of step back and say, wait a minute, this is what there was a time when I would have prayed weeping
Yeah.
for
Oh,
this. I mean, when we were going through infertility, and the doctors are telling us you'll never have kids, and that sort of thing, and I would have prayed, and here it is, and I'm used to it,
yes.
and there's just this moment of stepping back. I wonder what for me, when those moments happen, and you're talking about
Hmm.
Ecclesiastes saying,
Hmm.
find joy. Here's my problem that probably Celebrate Jesus doesn't have, but
But Eeyore,
Eeyore does. Uh, is it, when things are going really well, I start
hmm
getting nervous because I start thinking, well, this isn't going to last. And so when
hmm
is it going to end? I mean, isn't that
yes.
isn't that ridiculous? But that's what happens. And how do you let yourself kind
hmm
of find joy in a moment if you
hmm
do know
Mm.
that it's not
I
permanent?
think to take the reverse view of it, course Tier would say this, and it's like, no, I'm going to fully give myself to this because it's not going to last, because it's not going to. I
Yeah.
really think this is something it would be so fun to have a discussion around a table with a number of people to ask the kinds of things that are those where you can freeze a moment, and it would be like, this to me is the ultimate. This to me is one of those things that just gives me a burst of joy. But one of the things that I believe with all of my heart is that the Lord gives us those to help us over when it's tough, when it's really tough. I mean, when life is, like when we're miserable, that those moments, they'll come up. Good grief. You can be in the middle of a visitation. You could be in the middle of a time of getting an elderly parent's all their effects together and all of the things that you do when someone has passed away. And a moment will come where something so absurdly funny happens, and that
Yeah.
just roll on the floor about it, because God's given you a moment, I believe, with everything in me, that it's that release, it's that relief to that moment, and to take it. I've got to tell you something. I made a note. This is one of my stick notes because I thought I just have to tell this, because I think for most of us, if we thought about what is it that for that moment you can, instead of living in dread of the future, instead of constantly replaying the past, one of the things that the teacher is telling us is right now, right now. You could be here right now that now will not wait. It will not wait. And so be completely here. And I think for a lot of us, something like that takes place at a table, whether it is with dominoes, whether it's with a card game, whether it's feasting. Feasting is
Yeah.
one of my favorite things. But last Christmas, my girls had seen on a TikTok video a game called a Christmas Wig Exchange. Have you ever heard of this, Russ? Okay.
No. A
Okay. No,
Christmas
because I
wig
am so happy
exchange?
that this is
Okay.
going to be broadcast in time for people to pull this together. So whatever amount of people are going to be
Okay.
coming together for your Christmas, it doesn't even have to be on Christmas Day. Just say you're having a Christmas party, whatever it may be. Everybody has to bring in a gift bag a costume wig, and you can't tell anybody else what you got. So you got to go somewhere like Party City, or you got to get online. Everybody, okay. And so one at a time, each person, like they have to either draw, they're either numbered and they draw a number, or they just go get a bag, but they go into the bathroom and they have to put it on, and then they have to come out. Russ, and then we had to keep ours on. Russ, so it was my whole family. So it was Keith and me. It was our girls.
Oh, so you keep it
Oh,
on
you
the
keep
whole
it on for
evening.
the rest of the game for sure. And then at the end of it, we all traded. We took picture after picture. Russell Moore, when I tell you that we laughed and we took videos, so we have it all on video, and I sent it to him because I was thinking about this about teaching out of Ecclesiastes and taking the moment. When I pass away, if I have any kind of clarity of thought in my last 30 minutes, that scene will go off in my mind because it was perfect. And you could do it with a bunch of friends, but whatever, just to be with people when, okay, I'm so sorry that I'm talking so much, but I've had this on. So
No, no.
last week, I don't know if you saw or not, but I pitched out the question on Twitter/X. I said nothing else with it, nothing else with it on purpose. I just sent out the question, what makes you happy? I read and read
Hmm.
and read and read and read. And a lot of people answered that we're not people of faith. And you can imagine that there
Hmm.
was such a wide variety of things, but not one of them had to do with something that was expensive to buy. It constantly was. I like
Yeah.
a lot of them just sent back a picture of a pet. It had nothing. I mean, it would be a parrot, it would be a cat, it would be a dog, it would be a table, it would be friends, it would be the things that God has given us to enjoy most. You can't even put a price tag on those things.
If that's the case, and it is, and I think we know that it is, why do we keep assuming that it's the opposite? I mean, if you think about what we do, the things that we worry about, the things that we spend so much time on, they're
No,
not those
no,
things.
but we're meant to think how if you were to compare hours that we are indoctrinated in our faith and in the things of scripture and in the things of Christ, next to how much we are indoctrinated by the world. And in our case, it's this Western world where success is in money and notoriety and prominence of power. So you look at those two things, especially if what you're getting to feed into your faith is about a sermon a week. I mean, picture the
Yeah.
indoctrination that says, no, no, how successful you are is in terms of power, of following, of money, of what you were able to accomplish. So we're fed that constantly. But that the teacher is telling us in Ecclesiastes over and over again, I promise you, I have done all of that. You cannot outdo me here. And I'm going to tell you that you still will look back over it and go, what was I doing? What was I even
Yeah.
doing to think that was what was going to cut it for me?
I saw this quote and then I went and read the book it came out of. So the book wasn't for me. I'm not saying it's not
Okay.
for everybody. It wasn't for me, but but this part of it really was. And it's by Sally Rooney, called something like "Beautiful World, Where Are You?" But this is what the quote is. When I try to picture for myself what a happy life might look like, the picture hasn't changed very much since I was a child. A house with flowers and trees around it, and a river nearby, and a room full of books, and someone there to love me. That's all. Just to make a home there and to care for my parents when they grow older, never to move, never to board a plane again, just to
Mm.
live quietly and then be buried in the
Oh,
earth. What else is life for? But even that seems so beyond me that it's like a
yes.
dream. I mean, what else is life for? I mean, that's she, and this is from the perspective of this famous novelist who's going around and talking about her books and all of those sorts of things, and she realizes I actually what I want is a lot
Yes.
simpler
Oh,
than this.
yes. I was so intrigued. I've been meaning to ask you, have you ever read the book by Dr. Lydia Dugdale? I hope I'm saying her name right. The Lost Art of Dying.
Yes, and we just had her on
Oh
the
my God. Oh,
bulletin
you did?
last
Have you
week.
broadcast it yet?
Yeah, yeah, and because we were talking, she came on to talk about
Oh, okay.
Tylenol
Okay.
and autism and
Hmm.
all those sorts of questions. But she and I were together at a Trinity Forum event. It was the first time I heard her speak, and as soon as I left, I
Oh
ordered
my
that book
gosh.
because she was talking about that, about dying, and
It
wow,
it's
that is
so good, but
powerful.
she says something that is so much like what the teacher is saying. She for our listeners, she's a doctor, so she is and an ethicist, and so she's around people continually that are either receiving or giving bad news. And so her point is we don't even, she said, even in this profession, we hardly know how to give it. And she was talking about something. What intrigued me so much, Russ, was that she said, we who are of faith that believe in the resurrection of the dead. I mean, that is one of that's part of our spine of faith, that we ourselves struggle terribly with the whole idea of dying. And it made me think of one of the books that I got, David Gibson's Living Life Backward. He would be making the same point as what she was saying and what Ecclesiastes is saying, which is basically project toward the end of life. And what I like to ask people is, okay, do it where you're older, where you don't have to have the trauma of thinking that you're going to be young. So take the traumatic death out of it, natural death at the end of 70 plus years. And how is it you want, what would you have wanted your life to be about? What and so
Hmm.
her concept is that it is in knowing that you're a limited creature, knowing that ultimately you will pass from this life. How will you then live? And the word teaches us number our days. Jesus says, what profit is there if you gain the whole world? This is the gospel
Yeah,
version of Ecclesiastes. What profit is it if you gain the whole world but you have lost your soul? And that in just the
hmm,
pursuit of success and notoriety and worldly prominence, I just thought over and over again, the world, our Western culture has so lied to us. Here we've been called, I love my nation, but I want you to think about, we've been called to the right of the pursuit of happiness. But is what is happiness? Isn't that some of the questions
yeah,
that they're asking? What does that even look like? Because if we have to step on everybody to get there, if happiness is always about winning, then we are the biggest losers there are,
yeah,
because it's just not what produces a happy life. It was generosity. It was for a life of forgiveness, being people that grace other
yeah,
people. I just think it's fascinating to think in terms of, what do I want this to have looked like? And is my trajectory, am I pointed that direction? And as the Apostle Paul says, not that I've already attained, but I make this my pursuit.
yeah. Somebody asked me, we were having a conversation one time where somebody just threw out as a thought experiment. If you could have one piece of writing from the past or the future to look at for just a minute, what would it be? And I said, my obituary. And somebody there said, "Oh, that's dark." And I said, "No, it's not dark at all, because what I would want to do, I would want to look at that. And if it says Russell Moore dead by shark attack, then I wouldn't worry about anything else but sharks. I would be invincible to any kind of disease. And when I see survived by, I would know. I wouldn't then worry
Right.
about,
Right.
everybody that I'm survived by. Okay, they're going to be okay. And I sort of went through that. And I said, if I could just see that from the end, then it would free me up. And my friend said, "Well, you have that now." And I thought, well, yeah, I
But
guess
Russ,
that's
that was
right.
such a
And
good answer. One of the things that I think needs so much to be clarified in the life with Christ is said to us at the end of Hebrews chapter 11. It says then that they died without the promises, and I mean they could see it from a distance, but it had not been theirs to grasp, and they realized that this was not their place of belonging, this was not their home, that it was yet to come. But if we misunderstand that, one of the things I think we should teach, starting with youth, I mean, starting with teenage years and college and young adulthood, to teach that inherent in faith is a longing, so that we already know that no matter what, always keep room for the fact that no matter whether you always wanted to have dear friends. Well, you've got dear friends and it still isn't completely met. Well, you always wanted to get married. You get married. Well, you're still not completely satisfied. Well, you wanted to have kids. Well, I had a child and you're not, oh, still didn't quite do it. And all of the things to accept early on that we will always long for a place that we have not yet been. And I
yeah,
bet so many of us can understand that if when someone says to me, Beth, you have traveled so many countries, you've been so many places, where is your favorite place? And if I were really honest, if I couldn't just say my home, if I were really honest, I would have to answer, it's somewhere I've never been, but somewhere I long for every
hmm,
day of my life. And it's a little of what he's talking about in Ecclesiastes 3. He put eternity in our hearts, yet none of us know what God is doing from beginning to end. But that faith creates a longing, and don't misunderstand it, or you'll be on your fifth spouse. You know what I'm saying? You'll constantly,
yes,
there'll always be
yes.
something you think is better out there that, oh no, this wasn't it. Well, I walked away from all of that because I wasn't happy and all of those things. Well, if you keep misunderstanding that, it's going to be tremendously problematic. Leave room.
What about the people who will say maybe they didn't get
Uh-huh.
what they wanted? Maybe they wanted to be married, they didn't get married, or maybe they wanted children, they didn't want children,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, but career. Uh, and they kind of live their lives with, if only
Yes.
that had
Yes.
happened. So they've almost got this alternative
Yes.
reality where that happened
Yes.
and they were happy, and they're
Yes.
stuck in the one where they were
Yes.
sad.
Do you know what we're doing? Part of that is that I is saying of myself, I had the capacity to be an extremely joyful and happy person. It's just that the right things didn't happen to me. We have to
Yes.
take God at his word more than that. We have to know that he said that even in the anguish of this world, the trouble of this world, that we can have joy. And one of the things that I like to think about, for one thing, I think Thanksgiving, not the holiday, although I like it, but the actual practice of it, I think it stirs it up. That when I'm getting down about life or getting down about my circumstances, to redirect that with, Lord, look how good you have been to me, look at all that you have done, that helps so much. But I think it's important for people to say occasionally, not that I don't think we ought to over identify when we're not in their shoes. But I do think there is something to be said for, you know what? Everybody that you think has everything you are lacking, the truth of it is, in the privacy of their own lives, they have some things they are very disappointed about. There's just
Yeah.
nobody that's pulling this thing off flawlessly. Because, and how do I know it? Because of the scriptures. It's just there's not,
Yeah.
we're not going to, limited creatures that we are, our finitude, that we're not going to be able to pull it all off. We don't, this is not a hospitable, this world, after its brokenness in the garden, it's not hospitable to our happily ever after on this soil. It will be. I love the words of Christ where he says that he'll say, come into your master's happiness. I love that. We will.
Hmm.
But it's not going to be here. And until then, we get these flashes and these glimpses. And so the teacher is saying, stare in the face of them. Look, sit right there in it and let it last as long as it can. Laugh with it. Laugh with him.
I think somebody maybe who's reading Ecclesiastes for the first time would get to the end and it says,
Yes.
kind of as the last
Yes.
word, judgment.
Yes. Yes.
And somebody would say, well, what is that? I mean, how is that a word to leave me on? How do
Well,
you understand where
thank
judgment
goodness. For
fits in that?
one thing, I think I'm about to go deep in the weeds here, so pull me out in just a moment. But remember when you were talking a little while ago about Ecclesiastes 3 and the time, there's a time for this, there's a time for that. It comes to the end of that portion. It says the wildest thing, like he's talking about God putting eternity in our hearts, the gift of God. When anyone eats and drinks and enjoys all of his efforts, and I know that everything God does will last forever. And it comes to the end of verse 15, which comes to the end of a segment of thought. And he says, however, God seeks justice for the persecuted. It's like, whoa. How did justice get into that? And then
Hmm.
he does it at the very end. Again, there are a couple of different places. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'd love to know what you think, Russ, but I'm going to tell you my take on it. He's talking about these inner, these inner wrestlings, and our wrestling with life and finding meaning in it, and all the things that we think we can't, this won't fit with our rational minds. But one of those things is that no matter how we might skew what we do with this information, because we were created in the image of God, there is something in us that says, I love it in the words of Abraham, will not the judge of all the earth do right? And
Yeah.
that question, we have to be able to ask that. And so I think the teacher is calling us to that, going, you need to know that everything that is unjust here, every wrong, God has seen and it will be righted. So I'd love to know if you sort of, that's a simplistic way to put it, but I want to speak about judgment from the New Testament. And this is where I love that I hold the entire completed canon in my hands, because what
Hmm.
we have, what we're told is that our judgment, because everything, our sins have, that penalty's been paid on the cross for us. So, I mean, it's reward or loss of reward. Yes, we'll stand before the judgment seat, but it will not be thank goodness, there will not be a video played in front of all of heaven with all our most sinful moments on it. I mean, that sounds like
Yeah.
an eternal destination, but it would not be heaven. So, I just
Right.
can't even imagine that, but that the judge of all the earth will do right. He will do right. And he sits upon his throne and he does see, and he will deal. He will deal. And that's important. That's one of the deep
Yeah.
struggles of the human experience is what about all that seems unjust and people that have lived a life of have abused people. I mean, you and I are both aware of somebody that, I mean, went to his grave in his early 90s, having abused so many people and never was brought to earthly justice over it. So
Right.
that is a problem. That makes people think, where is God? Oh, he's there. He's there. And so even at the end of Ecclesiastes, he's coming back to that. He's going to handle it. The good and the bad, he's going to handle it.
I've been thinking all week about there was this interview with Joe Hill, who's the son of Stephen King.
Oh, wow.
And so he was talking about when he was 8 years old, he watched the televised version of Salem's Lot.
How
His
old
dad
was he?
And he talked about
Okay. Oh,
8.
gosh.
And he's talking about how terrified he was by this horror film. And I was thinking, you have to be even extra terrified when you realize, oh, that came out of the brain of my dad. But he was talking about it, and he said, he has come to the conclusion that people like scary stories, some more extreme than others, but they like those scary stories because they know that there's stuff out there that's
Yes.
awful. But the biggest fear is that that's impersonal and
Yes.
meaningless. And so what a horror story is able to do is to put a face on that evil so that it can be defeated. And I thought, you know what? You are really close to getting it.
So close.
So close to seeing what this is about. And judgment affirms that, is to say, and there's a freedom that actually comes from that, I think, for people who are, I think about Hebrew. I've been teaching Hebrews, and Hebrews 4, the word is a two-edged sword, leaving us naked and exposed before the one before whom we must give an account, and then goes directly into, we have Christ, therefore we boldly come before the throne of grace.
Yes. What
in one little section there together. They really do hold
together. And the appreciation of, okay, that this would be my complete estate without this torn veil and the penalty of Christ, the blood of Christ that brings me straight before the throne for grace and mercy in my time of need. That I love the juxtaposition of it. I love it. I love that we are faced, even in the pages of Ecclesiastes, with a life that we're thinking, what this hasn't worked at all. And yet we've got a God who says in Romans 8:28, well, actually, if you have a heart for God, if you're called according to his purpose, he's going to make it work out ultimately in a way that you don't know and you don't see. Russell, one of the things that Keith and I really enjoy doing, now I enjoy it more than he does, but he enjoys me enjoying him doing it. So, he'll go roundabout. So if this is what makes me happy, because I grew up in a family where we played games and things. He doesn't like to do any of that, but he'll work a puzzle with me. So, and he only will work, it's got to be 300 pieces, no more, because he's not going to pay attention longer than that. So we lay it all the way out, but this doesn't sound like something two people would get tickled over, except that Keith and I think everything is funny. It is part of the gift that God gave us, is that we think everything is funny. And we'll be working on a puzzle, and we'll get a piece, and both of us do this, where we force that. I mean, it's like, no, I can tell you do fit. You have this shape, you should fit. And I mean, we'll press it down, and the other one will go, you can't make it fit. And then the other one will go, but it missed a good opportunity to fit. And we do that, just trying to force those pieces into that puzzle, but he will make it all fit. We're not all be able to get the faith aspect out of our walk with Christ if our lives depend on it. We're never going to get to where we can, that it's all sight, because that's just not faith. Yeah. It's not faith.
We play, because of my youngest, Taylor, really loves the game Chameleon.
No.
Have y'all ever played this? Okay. Well, what you have is you've almost got you've got a list of words in a category, and everybody gets a secret, card, and it tells you kind of where on the grid is the word, except for one person who's the chameleon. That person has no idea what the word is, but you have to pretend like you do and fool everybody else. Maria is terrible at this game. She cannot lie convincingly at all. And I am terrifyingly good at the game. which worries me.
Yes, we do one similar to that where you're putting down, where you have to do face down the next, you're building up, from an ace to and on up to a king, and you're acting like, you have the next card, and somebody at the table calls you out and goes, I think you're lying, and picks up the card, and
Yeah,
that's the same kind of idea. But the laughter over just the silly things, and I think as much as anything,
yeah,
I would say to somebody, don't miss that. Don't miss it. If
yeah.
you've got a moment that comes to you that was given to you for your relief and your refreshment and your recreation, take it instead of thinking, well, there's so much suffering in the world. Yes, there is. And that's why you take
Right.
this moment. You take it because you
That's
can't
right.
fix all. Oh, I want to read you before we get off. I have to read you. I read this to my group at simulcast. This is in the acknowledgments. Now, I would love to know among all of our listeners how many of them read obsessively through the acknowledgments. I'm one of those. I just love it. But he says, so this is David Gibson in Living Life Backward. And he says, so this acknowledgments, it comes to where he thanks his wife and his kids. And he says, so he says to my wife and my sons and my daughters, and he says, you are the ones who helped me hear the preacher of Ecclesiastes laughing as he shows how shoulders are meant for abundance and mayhem, not for the weight of the world. And
Mm,
I think that is such a good way to start bringing this to a close, is that we are not God. We don't have his shoulders. We can't
yeah.
we can't do it all. I heard somebody talking about Ecclesiastes, a theologian just here recently, and he said his wife she wants to meet every need there ever is, wants to fix all of the problems of everyone she knows and doesn't know. And he said that the struggle with that is that we just flat can't do it. We can't do it. And to
Yeah.
be able to take a deep breath and go, Lord, you are God. You created this world. You love this world. I can do what you set in front of me, and only that with your help. But I cannot be you. I think at the end of
Mm,
Ecclesiastes, it is humility. He is God. We are not.
yeah.
Mm.
We are not. Last thing, if you had to tell a new Bible reader who says, "Okay, you've convinced me. I want to read Ecclesiastes," you had to say, "I want to pair it with something else, some other book of the Bible." What book would you tell them to read alongside
Oh,
it?
goodness. Okay, I'd have to go. I, you know what? I think I would choose Acts. I think I
Acts.
would. I was going to say one of the Gospels, and I would always tend toward Luke, but I think I might say this. This is the life that is just lived by. This is faith. This is what it looks like. This is what believing God looks like. This is what the perils, all the things that they went through, all the deaths of saints, the hardships, the beatings, and then the outrageous joys of it. It shows kind of that ride of faith. But I think what I would
Mm,
also say to someone reading it, if they were just reading it alone, read it out loud and read it like you wrote it. Start from the very beginning of it
ah,
and put your feelings with it, put your emotions with it, and see what comes out and how relieved you are. Okay, Russ, I have to turn that question back to you, and it's going to drive me crazy because this evening I'm going to go, I should have said so and so. What would you put with it?
I think I'd put
Yes,
John.
yes, yes, I see that.
Because you have such a focus on the long, 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 long term
Yes,
in
yes,
John. I mean, especially there at the end when you think about when Jesus is saying to Peter, I'm telling you that you're going to go where you would
yes,
not choose to
yes,
go. And he's giving them that. It's almost like
it is.
Ecclesiastes. It's all going to end in death. but then he takes it one step
Yes.
further. And that's
It's
beautiful.
just marvelous. This is why we say, as often as anyone will hear us out, there is nothing like a life that is lived in pursuit of Christ through the pages of Scripture. It's endless. There's no getting to the bottom of the conversations and the grapplings that go with it. And so, anyway, this to me is the most fun thing on earth. I love it.
This is Beth Moore with us for an edition of Eeyore and Tigger Read Ecclesiastes. And I can commit to one thing. I predict that when my sons get home for Christmas and I do a wig competition, they're going to be quoting Ecclesiastes saying, "I hate my life."